The most radical thing you could do today, in this very moment, is deny the premise that the world is complete.
Because if the world is complete, if everything is knowable, countable, and finite, then the only possibility we have is rearrangement.
Just moving the pieces around.
Exactly. And if there is only rearrangement, there is no genuine novelty, no true revolution, and we are effectively trapped in an endless loop of the status quo.
Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand. We have landed today in territory that is both ancient and fiercely contemporary, courtesy of the French philosopher Alain Badiou and his incredibly provocative confrontation with the very origins of Christianity.
And we should be clear from the start, we're not reading the Bible as theology today. We're reading it as a philosophical case study in radical politics.
Right. The source driving our deep dive is Bruce Worthington's exploration, Alain Badiou, and the Book of Revelation, the emergence of a truth.
And this is not a traditional historical review of early Christian sects, not at all.
No. Our mission is to take Badiou's incredibly rigorous philosophical apparatus.
His whole system, the event, the subject, fidelity.
Exactly that. And use it as a kind of high-powered lens to dissect the emergence of early Christianity, looking at it not as a fledgling religion,
but as a revolutionary political and philosophical occurrence, something that fundamentally reset the world's counters.
The intellectual stakes here are massive, really, primarily because academic thought has been caught in this, crippling trap for centuries.
Oh, absolutely. On one side, you have this idea of rational progression, the whole Hegelian thing where history is just following an inevitable, predetermined script.
Everything was meant to happen.
Right. And then on the other, you have the cynical postmodern view that says history is only random power dynamics, just one thing after another.
And neither of those paradigms allows for real, non-derivative novelty to just burst forth, does it?
Not at all. And that is exactly the existential itch Badiou is trying to scratch.
He's asking, how can we even conceptualize the appearance of genuinely new truth or real radical political change when the ambient noise of our culture constantly tells us that everything has limits?
That everything is knowable, that everything is already complete.
Yeah, if every change is just a reshuffling of existing parts, then true revolutions, whether it's in love, art, science, or politics, they're impossible. They're just fantasies.
So our mission today is really a shortcut to understanding the stakes of this philosophical tension. We are going to meticulously map out Badiou's architecture of the event.
And then we're going to use it to read figures like the Apostle Paul and, crucially, the militant text of the Book of Revelation.
We want to know what this whole apparatus tells us about the nature of revolutions, both ancient and present.
And maybe whether we today are even capable of recognizing an event if it happened right in front of us.
That's the real question.
Okay, so let's unpack this setup. If we're talking about high philosophical stakes, we need a villain, a big one.
Right, a high-stakes villain that threatens all possibility.
And for Badiou, the ultimate antagonist isn't a government or an individual tyrant. It's an entire, pervasive belief system he calls finitude.
Finitude. It's a dense philosophical term, but its effect is simple and, insidious.
So what is it?
Badiou defines it as the pervasive modern ideological fetish. It's the insistence on the limits of what is possible. It's a mindset that aggressively denies anything of universal, infinite value.
And Worthington, our source, argues this mindset is basically the dominant order of our world today.
Exactly. It subtly elects scholars, politicians, everyday people by just constraining their sense of what's even possible.
This isn't just about, accepting mortality, is it? It's much bigger.
Oh, much bigger. It's about accepting that the current political and economic configurations are natural and complete. And what's fascinatingly dark about this finitude is how it shows up. It manifests as a kind of ideological truce.
What he calls a shared or double nihilism.
A double nihilism, meaning two supposedly opposing ideological streams actually converge. They end up affirming the very same oppressive finitude.
Okay, you have to break that down. Who are the two sides here?
Well, Badiou sees the modern landscape as this pseudo-struggle between two types of conservatism. On one side, you have what he calls the deadly striving of certain conservative traditional Christianities.
What does he mean by deadly striving?
They're attempting the impossible resurrection of the dead God. They're rigidly clinging to an old external transcendence that, in Badiou's view, just can no longer sustain genuine novelty.
They're trying to force a closed world back into an ancient, rigid container.
Perfectly put. And on the other side,
the secular streams.
you find the secular streams, cheerful atheism, Republicans, secularism, postmodern skepticism, and these streams, despite their rejection of the old God, ultimately converge with the religious conservatives.
How? They seem like total opposites.
Because they also insist that the world is closed. They reduce all meaning to localized power dynamics or historical constructs. So the consequence of both the rigid believer and the cheerful skeptic is an oppressive structure.
It's an essential renunciation of the existence of any value whatsoever.
Exactly. It's nihilism dressed up in different clothes.
So whether you're rigidly clinging to an old, transcendent deity that demands obedience, or you're cynically rejecting all stable, universal values in favor of endless deconstruction, you're both complicit.
You're both complicit in the belief that the world is essentially closed and that nothing truly new or infinite can happen.
And the source material details how this state of finitude it suffocates human subjectivity through 4 distinct operational oppressions. We should probably spend some time on these.
Absolutely. They frame the entire problem. The first is religious oppression. This forces people into the narrow confines of what is possible. We see this when religious systems prioritize excessive humility, total obedience to ordained law, rigid ritual.
And in doing that, they're constantly affirming the subject's own smallness, their own finitude, against a vastly powerful, transcendent God.
Right. The subject becomes servile, preoccupied with their own limitations rather than their capacity for universal truth.
That sounds like humility being weaponized against political action.
That is its function. It directs energy inward towards self-censure and ritual compliance rather than outward towards transformative change.
Okay, so that's the first one.
The second is oppression by the state. The state, Badiou argues, is maybe the ultimate apparatus of finitude.
Because its whole job is to produce difference.
Exactly. Guaranteeing who is our own people through passports, laws, borders, citizenship, and who is excluded. The state reacts with inherent structural violence to any glimpse of the infinity of equality that a genuine event might introduce.
Because the state's existence depends entirely on managing and maintaining the existing set of countable, finite differences.
Yes.
So if a universal egalitarian truth like, say, all people are fundamentally equal regardless of state or religion, suddenly bursts forth, the state has to crush it. It threatens the very logic of separation.
The state cannot tolerate the infinite potential of a truth. Which brings us to the third oppression, which is maybe the most defining one for our modern lives. Oppression by the economy. Here, the subject exists in a fundamental servile relation to the immutable, unfathomable laws of the movement of capital.
You're talking about how capital is treated as a force of nature? Unchangeable, unchallengeable.
Precisely. The economic apparatus insists that its cycles, its booms and busts are just unavoidable. And when the market fails, or when a person suffers economic failure, that failure is cynically externalized.
It's blamed on those who didn't believe in it enough.
Or who didn't work hard enough. It reinforces the idea that capital's logic is this godlike force of nature that can't be criticized or changed by collective action. It just reinforces the finitude of our material potential.
That is a brilliant articulation of how economic determinism fits into this. Okay, and the last one.
Finally, we find oppression by philosophy itself. This is the contemporary philosophical tendency to insist that everything, bodies, language, identities, is fundamentally constructible.
Okay, but what's the problem with that? A lot of things are constructed.
The problem isn't that things are constructed. The problem is the conclusion drawn from it. If identity, language, or bodies are merely constructs invented and organized by social norms, then they are also, by definition, deconstructible.
And that leads to a kind of intellectual futility.
It does. Endless analysis results in things losing their actual lived meaning for those involved.
So if everything is just a construct waiting to be dismantled, then nothing truly matters, and nothing can truly be created that lasts. It leaves philosophers analyzing their own discourse,
turning it into a museum of itself, perpetually curating old ideas without the capacity to launch new ones.
It's important to absorb this backdrop of finitude because Badiou's whole point is that the dominant academic approaches to Christian origins actively reinforce these oppressions.
They do it by covering over the idea of a singular novel event. They can't see the revolutionary cut because their methodological tools are designed only to see the countable stuff, the finite.
So let's identify these academic villains that Worthington points out in the source material. The classic one first, Hegelian dialectical rationalism.
Right. This perspective, which was hugely influential through scholars like F.C. Barr and Adolf von Harnack, sees history as a rational, inevitable process. It's all moving toward a final, perfect goal.
And for them, that goal was the spirit religion, which culminated in Christianity.
Yes. Everything else, Jewish, Greek, Roman religions, becomes just a determinate religion, a necessary stage of transition.
Okay, so what's the philosophical problem with seeing it that way?
The problem is that this framework utterly diminishes the interruptive potency of the event.
It takes away the shock.
Completely. If the event, let's say the resurrection, was simply a historical necessity, something that had to happen to fulfill the dialectic of history, then it wasn't a radical break at all.
It was just a scheduled appointment. It was protocol.
Exactly. It negates the sheer novelty required for an event. And we even see this logic applied politically.
Right, with Engels.
Exactly. Friedrich Engels famously mapped this Hegelian dialectic onto early Christianity. He saw the earliest Christ groups as an antecedent to the communist workers' movement, an inevitable historical stage toward universal emancipation.
So the point is, whether it's theological or Marxist, this view subordinates the event to a pre-written, rational script.
Oh.
It kills its novelty.
It does. Which brings us to the second villain, its modern successor, genealogical deconstruction.
The Nietzsche and Foucault school of thought.
Right. And this approach is a total rebellion against Hegel. It rejects rational progress entirely. It sees history as irrational, haphazard, driven only by power dynamics.
They reject the search for stable origins.
For the genealogist, history has no essence, just a brutal series of chance encounters and power grabs.
And the consequence of that view is that the event, the thing that sparks the new truth, gets reduced to just myth-making.
It becomes a mere narrative invented later by social groups to justify their power, their cohesion, their social investment.
And you see this in biblical scholarship all the time. Scholars bracket out references to the miraculous event to focus purely on social self-definition.
They see the novelty as just a result of internal community myth-making. They only see the human construction, never the foundational cut.
Now, Badiou actually finds common ground with Nietzsche against Hegel's rationalism.
He does. They both agree history is often brutal and unintelligent, but he issues a powerful critique of the genealogical method itself.
Which is what?
He criticizes it for leaving the field of discourse with little left to do but analyze itself. By historicizing everything, religion, love, truth, the discourse becomes this museum of itself.
It's a closed-loop system where nothing can be affirmed.
Mm.
The language of the infinite, of radical possibility, is just constrained and ultimately rejected.
So we're caught between these two conservative academic forces,
Okay.
one that assimilates the event into necessity, Hegel, and one that dissolves it into pure myth and power, genealogy.
And both of them deny the radical possibility of a real non-derivative cut, which is why we need Badiou's architecture to see how a genuine cut actually works and how it could launch a new world.
Exactly. If Section 1 defined the enemy, this oppressive ideology of finitude, then this section defines the counter-strategy.
This is Badiou's core operating system. This is how genuine, universal novelty bursts into existence against the backdrop of the closed world.
Let's start with the core binary. The world is fundamentally structured by this tension.
Between the situation finitude, which is, what is the status quo, the countable set of elements that can be inventoried.
Versus the event truth, the radical exception, the potential infinite that lies beyond enumeration.
So if we look inside Badiou's engine room, what is the hidden mechanism that links the finite situation with the infinite truth?
It's a four-part chain reaction. A truth emerges from an event.
Which is an unpredictable exception that cuts the situation's laws.
Right, and that truth is only materialized when a subject performs an intervention.
An illegal naming of the event.
And then acts with fidelity to draw out the event's maximal consequences, ultimately forming a new political body that reorganizes the situation itself.
Wow. Okay, that is the entire chain of revolutionary, non-derivative change.
That's the whole machine.
That is a dense chain. We need to decode those mechanisms one by one. Let's start with the event. We are not talking about a major historical moment like a war or an election, are we?
No, not necessarily. An event is, by definition, a rare, unpredictable moment. It is an exception to the established laws of being. It introduces a cut or a tension into the existing organization of a cultural situation.
So it's not the predictable result of normal social maintenance or some scheduled ritual?
Definitely not. It is an imminent break. It happens within the world, but it acts as a source of total novelty.
The key insight here, and this is where the academic debate really heats up, is the event's undecidable ontological status. Explain why that term matters so much.
It matters because it is the philosophical justification for why the event requires subjective commitment.
Meaning you can't prove it.
You absolutely cannot prove definitively, using the laws of the existing situation, that the event has occurred. If you could prove it, if you could inventory it using the situation's existing metrics, it would just be part of the predictable laws of that situation.
It would just be another countable fact.
Exactly. The event is always, in its moment of eruption, undecidable from the perspective of the status quo.
So if the status quo says that didn't happen, it's irrelevant, the person claiming the event has no logical tools within the system to prove otherwise.
None. It takes a leap of subjective commitment.
And that leap is what launches the possibility of truth.
Precisely. Now, the truth introduced by the event. How does Badiou define that? It seems almost metaphysical, even though he insists his philosophy is rigorously materialist.
A truth, for Badiou, is not a fact or a statement. It is an eternal concept produced in empirical time that maintains its exceptional quality and remains intelligible beyond its original context.
And crucially, Badiouian truths are non-constructible and universal. They are indifferent to differences. They are not the property of an ethnic, cultural, or religious predicate. They offer the possibility of the infinite equality that finitude denies.
To make that concept stick, let's use the example he uses. The Spartacus slave revolt.
A perfect example. The historical revolt, the battles, the specific leaders, the time, the place, that's all locked in that time and space. That is the initial evental site.
But the truth that emerged from that event is what keeps it alive.
Yes. The truth of the revolt, the idea of universal, immediate, and egalitarian liberation of the enslaved that travels from world to world through the centuries.
You have ancient Spartacus, the historical figure.
Then you have the black Spartacus of the Haitian Revolution. You have the red Spartacus of communist uprisings. The material event is fixed, but the truth it introduced is the eternal concept that remains intelligible across these different historical situations.
And it reignites subjective commitment. Badiou calls this subjective reactivation resurrection.
Exactly. So the event is the historical eruption. The truth is the eternal principle it carries.
So how does that infinite potential translate into a real-world, finite political body that requires the subject and their action, intervention and fidelity?
Right. The intervention is the absolutely necessary, public, and crucially illegal act of naming the undecidable event as having occurred and publicly committing to draw out its radical consequences.
It's the political moment of inauguration.
It is. Badiou is clear. The essence of the intervention consists in naming this there is and in unfolding the consequences of this nomination in the space of the situation.
Okay, why must the intervention be illegal? And why must it be public?
It must be illegal because from the perspective of the situation, the established laws and powers of finitude, that event has not happened. Or if it has, it's insignificant, irrelevant, already contained.
So the intervention is essentially illegal from the perspective of the state. It cannot conform to any law of representation.
Yes. If you intervene and proclaim that the event changes everything, you are defying the laws of the status quo. And it has to be public, not private speculation or quiet mysticism, because the entire effort is about changing the collective situation, not just your private mind.
And this commitment then leads to the sustained, difficult work of fidelity.
Fidelity is the ongoing collective process of reorganizing one's entire life and actions around the radical, infinite implications of that founding event.
So the faithful subject rejects minimal consequences.
They do. They reject those who try to locate the event back within the traditional logic of the situation. They insist on maximal revolutionary consequences. They are constantly testing the limits of how far the truth can be taken.
So fidelity is what turns a singular historical moment into a political engine for universal change.
It is. Without this sustained militant process of drawing out maximal consequences, the event just remains a trace, a strange historical anomaly, instead of a constitutive element for a new revolutionary political body.
Okay, now we take this sophisticated anti-religious philosophical machine.
And we apply it to the emergence of early Christianity.
In Badiou's framework, the primal event is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the initial, undecidable cut in the situation defined by diaspora Judaism and the Roman Empire.
And what's brilliant about this application is that Badiou's framework immediately provides a way to organize the notorious diversity, the multiples of early Christian groups.
You can organize them by measuring their subjective allegiance against the event.
You can see a whole spectrum of consequences being drawn. On one end, you have the minimal or reactive consequences. These groups were fundamentally conservative.
They sought to domesticate the event.
Right.
To bring it back into the confines of finitude.
Exactly. They located the resurrection as only a slight modification or a fulfillment of tradition, integrating it back into the traditional site of faith, which was typically early Judaism.
He called them reactive subjects.
Because their goal is to organize the denial of the event's formal novelty. They want the event to affirm what already exists, not break what already exists.
The source material uses the book of James as an example of this reactive position, which I found a little surprising. Why, James?
Well, the Epistle of James contains surprisingly little formal reference to the event of the resurrection itself. Its focus is primarily on wisdom, good works, traditional ethical practices for the 12 tribes scattered among the nations.
So the consequence drawn is minimal. The meaning of Jesus is just incorporated back into the traditional site of faith and ethics.
Precisely. The focus shifts away from the radical singularity of the resurrection, the break, and back toward established moral compliance, which is exactly the trap of religious suppression we discussed earlier.
Okay, so conversely, we have the maximal or faithful consequences. This is the group that sees the event as a fundamental, revolutionary break in the laws of appearing in the first century world.
And that requires militant fidelity. This is the territory of Paul.
Right. Badiou calls him the poet-thinker of the event.
And the exemplary faithful subject. Paul's letters are not theological treatises on the nature of God. They are precisely the interventions that explore the maximal consequences of the event.
His genius was taking that undecidable event, the resurrection, and rigorously working out what it means for the formation of a universal non-ethnic collective that transcends the situation of Judaism and Rome.
He wasn't interested in the historical details of Jesus' life as much as what the event did to the world.
Yes, Paul is only interested in what happens after the resurrection for this new generic collective that is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free.
And that is the maximal consequence. Universal equality, indifferent to established differences.
This framework, by providing a robust philosophical space for the event, directly challenges the historicist interpretations that just dismiss the novelty of Christian origins.
This is where we need to address the error Badiou sees in modern scholarship.
Like with scholars who operate under the genealogical method, someone like Burton Mack.
Exactly. They bracket references to the event. They see any novelty as a result of social self-definition and myth-making. They look at the sheer diversity of early groups, the multitude of external influences, and they conclude there's no singular origin.
Just social construction over time. They just enumerate all the facts they can find.
And Badiou warns that this enumeration is philosophically crippling.
Why?
He warns that while historians can and should enumerate all the traces and facts, inventorying all the elements of the Evental site, the Roman taxes, the Jewish sects, this process may well lead to the one of the event being undone.
To the point of it being no more than the forever infinite numbering of the gestures, things, and words that coexisted with it.
Exactly. So the historian lists all the pieces of the puzzle, but by focusing so intently on the pieces, they deny the possibility of the picture.
They confuse the site with the event.
That's the key confusion. If we eliminate the possibility of a novel event a priori, we are simply fashioning a historical perspective on Christian origins that fits within the vision of what is already credible within secular modernity, the order of finitude.
It's a self-confirming loop.
Totally.
Which brings us to the sensitive question of sui generis, the non-derivative nature of Christianity.
Right, a very loaded term. Traditional Christian apologetics used it arrogantly to claim theological superiority, which is why many modern scholars reject the term entirely.
But Badiou reclaims it.
He reclaims it by stripping away the theological arrogance and installing rigorous philosophy. He argues that the evental truth is sui generis not because it's somehow mystically superior, but because its inherent logic cannot be located directly within its cultural situation.
It truly is non-derivative. It's a genuine cut. And why is it non-derivative?
Because the mechanism that connects the faithful subject to the event fidelity has no a priori tie to belonging or inclusion. It's not about being born a Roman citizen or a member of the Jewish diaspora. It's a universal call to reorganize life around a truth that is indifferent to all those predicates.
So a faithful intervention, one that insists on maximal consequences, can be accurately described as sui generis because it functions as an imminent break, an exception that can't be regulated by the situation's finite laws.
It truly appears first as itself on the day it is proclaimed by the faithful.
So, to use that master analogy we talked about, trying to understand the emergence of Christianity using standard historical tools is like trying to understand the iPhone by analyzing the social formations of copper miners and glass blowers in 2005.
Right. You can list all the components, the situation, but without recognizing the singular event, the death resurrection.
And the subsequent fidelity of the developers and consumers? The subsequent intervention.
You miss the moment of true non-derivative novelty that launched a new political body.
And that new political body is precisely what the Book of Revelation tries to regulate.
Exactly. The Book of Revelation gives us a trajectory of an eventual truth much later than Paul. It's not the initial spark, it's the detailed study of the full formation of a world resulting from the event.
Okay, let's define that term first. A world, for Badiou.
A world is defined as a configuration of multiples, like the early Christ groups, that appear there with transcendentally regulated relations. The appearance of the 7 churches in Asia Minor is the creation and anticipation of a new world, one that is an exception to the existing order governed by Rome.
And the historical reality matters here.
It does. We know from archaeological discoveries, like the famous map of Dura Europos, that the Mithraeum, the synagogue, and the Christ Association often existed side by side.
So there was a necessary intermingling. This is not some private, mystical contemplation.
Not at all. The emergent truth was public and political, and it desperately needed a logical order internal to itself to survive the powerful external situation.
And the operative figure defining this new logic is John of Patmos. He is the subject of Fidelity who intervenes.
John is the operative subject who explores the maximal consequences of the resurrection event in a situation of extreme duress. His exile to Patmos is absolutely significant.
Why?
Historical sources like Tertullian and Jerome describe it as relegatio in insulum banishment for specific offenses that threaten public interest, usually associated with treason or sedition.
So John is literally subtracted from the situation by Roman power.
Which makes his proclamation an illegal intervention because it cannot conform to the Roman law of representation.
He's intervening from a position of political illegality, giving him the perfect vantage point to draw maximal consequences.
He's further along the trajectory than Paul, mediating between 2 events, the initial death resurrection and the future anticipated event of the New Jerusalem.
And this mediation is crucial. It shows that the evental trajectory is ongoing.
It is. He avoids what Badiou calls the trap of speculative leftism, which fantasizes about an absolute commencement, a totally clean break from history. John is rooted in the past event and projects it forward to a future one, making the current collective action, Fidelity, the engine that links them.
How does he perform his militant intervention? By creatively re-articulating the language and structures of the evental site, diaspora Judaism in the Roman Empire, to organize his new political body.
He's hijacking the language of the situation.
Let's detail the linguistic intervention, starting with the surprising use of the tree of life imagery.
Right. John uses the term acute upsilon lambdae, which means wood or tree. But elsewhere in the New Testament, acute upsilon lambda refers specifically and starkly to the crucifixion of Jesus, the wood of the cross.
And John uses this same loaded term to describe the tree of life from Genesis, which promises eternal life.
That is a profound act of linguistic fidelity. He is collapsing Genesis, the primordial site of creation, with the event of the crucifixion resurrection into a single point of reference.
This is an instance of evental recurrence.
Yes. Linking a past historical site with the event to establish a continuous trajectory of truth. He's making a novel connection, suggesting that the crucifixion, the instrument of death, is itself the radical source of renewed life, and that life is now accessible to the faithful collective.
Okay. Next, we have the ubiquitous image of the Lamb of God.
The Lamb is used over 29 times in Revelation, and we have to resist the simple theological reading. This is not merely a simple repetition of Hebrew Bible imagery, like the silent suffering lamb of Isaiah 53.
It's the additional element of the event, the resurrection, that transforms the metaphor.
It transforms it into a political body. The lamb is now associated with Moses and the Exodus. It is the creation of a new, conquering people. The lamb is accorded prestige, receives worship, and is called Lord of Lords and King of Kings.
Which is a direct political challenge to the Roman emperor, who also claim to be Lord of Lords.
Exactly. The lamb is the symbol of a new rival sovereign power that emerges from the depths of the situation, but is indifferent to the situation's laws.
And furthermore, John structures his letters in Revelation 2 and 3 using formal political conventions.
He structures them similarly to ancient Near Eastern vassal treaties, ANEVT.
We need to ground this detail for you. What are these treaties and why is this political?
Vassal treaties were the formalized documents used by major imperial powers, the Hittites, the Assyrians, later the Romans, to regulate the relationship between the central authority and its conquered territories or satellite states.
And they follow a predictable pattern.
They do. A preamble naming the sovereign, a historical prologue of the sovereign's benevolent actions, ethical stipulations for the vassal state, and sanctions for obedience or disobedience.
So by adopting this format, John is not just writing a letter, he is defining a new political constitution for his 7 Christ groups.
Exactly. He is hijacking the high-stakes, public legalistic structure used by empires to formally regulate a counter-political body. This avoids the problem of prophecy as private illumination or secret mysticism. It makes the event's consequences public, official, and militant. He is creating the internal laws of the new world.
This militant intervention, however, immediately encounters resistance within the emergent body, leading to the conflict of consequences in those letters.
This conflict pits the faithful, led by John, against those drawing minimal or reactive consequences.
The groups associated with the Nicolaitans and the figure named Jezebel.
Right. These opponents advocate for freedom from certain restrictions, like eating meat sacrificed to idols or strict sexual prohibitions, ostensibly to gain social status and wealth within the empire.
So they're basically saying, the event means we are free from the old constraints, so let's integrate seamlessly into the Roman political landscape, gain status, and increase our wealth.
And John views this as an immediate denial of the event's novelty and a disastrous capitulation to the immutable, unfathomable laws of the movement of capital.
This alignment with wealth, status, and the empire's logic is an absolute betrayal of the event's egalitarian potential.
Which is why John's intervention is marked by a dialectical combination of absolute authoritarianism with principled egalitarianism.
This brings us to the most difficult part of the Badiouian analysis, John's use of terror. He threatens to strike her children dead and reveals the horror of Babylon, Rome, drunk with the blood of the holy people.
Right. When Badiou discusses the necessary terror of political insurgents, how do we reconcile that violence with the universalism of the truth? Is he suggesting that John's imagery is a literal political blueprint for revolution?
That's the critical challenge here.
Badiou is reading this structurally, not morally. In his framework, this terror serves a specific brutal political function. It is not necessarily retributive justice or resentment.
It's consistent with the necessary terror of political insurgents.
But why necessary? Because it serves the dissolution of the rich and is designed to maintain the principle of relative equality within the collective.
Explain the dissolution of the rich.
If Jezebel and her affluent followers are permitted to obscure the event by aligning with wealth-gaining social status through compliance with imperial systems, then the generic, universal truth, which must be accessible to the poor, the slaves, the marginalized, it's immediately compromised.
Because wealth and the structures of finitude are inherently conservative.
Exactly. Therefore, the wealthy subject, in their capacity as a representative of the situation, must be dissolved, metaphorically or materially, for the eventual maxim of equality to hold. This is the inherent militant binary of fidelity.
So the choice is fidelity to the eventual truth or indiscernibility from the founding oppressive values of the empire. The violence isn't random. It is directed explicitly against those who are reintroducing the principles of the situation, hierarchy, wealth, status, into the emerging world of the Christ groups.
It's a fight against the return of finitude.
By intervening, John of Patmos lays out the entire evental trajectory. He's operating between the past event, resurrection, and the future anticipated event, New Jerusalem.
Firmly rooting revelation between two events. This shows that fidelity is not about commemorating a past event, but militantly constructing a future one.
The New Jerusalem is the final materialist political vision resulting from this trajectory. It is not heaven. It is a new regime of existence.
Right, juxtaposed against Babylon, or Rome, defined by its accessibility to all nations, not a closed ethnic particularity. This vision is the radical exception to the transcendental constitution of the situation.
And the egalitarian principle is realized through a vision of immanent solidarity, God's dwelling is now among the people.
The transcendence that once separated God from humanity has collapsed, making truth immanent to the collective.
And the most provocative political consequence of this vision, and one that is often missed in traditional readings, is the detail that marks the death of metaphysics and traditional religion.
The big one. John explicitly notes the absence of a central structure. I did not see a temple in the New Jerusalem.
This is a radical political statement. The temple in Jerusalem was not just a spiritual site. It was an immense political and economic institution.
A kind of central bank that centralized wealth through tithes and offerings. It reinforced the traditional structures of hierarchy and separation between the sacred and the profane.
So by renouncing the temple, John is signing the death warrant for traditional religious structures that centralize power and wealth.
It is the ultimate political vision. The New Jerusalem has no need for a massive centralized economic structure because the generic universal truth is available to all without mediation or cost.
This materialist political vision truly anticipates the victory of the proletariat, as certain scholars have argued.
It demands an end to the structure of difference and separation that finitude thrives on. Which brings us back to how Badiou re-examines core Christian practices like baptism and the Eucharist.
Which are often dismissed by modern thinkers as conservative repetitions.
Right. If the event is the cut and fidelity is the consequence, what is the role of ritual?
Rituals should not be viewed as conservative, commemorative repetitions that lock the subject into finitude, what he calls the seductive rhetoric of death.
That would be a negative repetition, merely consolidating the existing oppressive order. It's when you repeat the ritual to affirm the hierarchy already in place that it becomes conservative.
Instead, they must be creative repetition.
Exactly. Baptism and Eucharist should be viewed as creative repetitions because they unite the believer to the event, as if no time had passed at all, reaffirming the egalitarian principle and drawing out the event's consequences into material acts.
Like when Paul discusses the Eucharist, he's horrified that the wealthy are eating better than the poor within the ritual setting.
That's the perfect example. When ritual is used to enforce social stratification, it repeats the negative finite cycle. When it is used to proclaim the event and enforce equality, it is revolutionary.
So what are the implications for modern thought and contemporary religious life?
Badiou's framework suggests that the only valid task of theology today is to work out the consequences of the event, Jesus has died and been resurrected, within a specific cultural situation.
And it requires no ontological commitments from its adherents, other than concluding that such a thing has happened.
It must be a subjective process of identifying consequences that shatter the status quo.
But the hard reality, as Badiou sees it, is that contemporary Western Christianity has largely failed this test of fidelity. It has become an apparatus of finitude.
It has become an apparatus for capitalism. Christian faithfulness and its virtues are so thoroughly embedded in the cultural situation that the distinction between faith and the prevailing capitalist ethos is rarely discernible.
So contemporary Christianity, in this reading, defends the most conservative elements of the current situation. It has opted for minimal consequences.
It means the warning is severe. If a genuine interruptive truth were to appear today in politics, in science, in art, it would likely happen outside formal Christianity as a hostile, unexpected feature.
Because formal Christianity now represents the status quo.
Exactly. The choice ahead, which will require courage, will be between fidelity to an evental truth or diminishing its radical capacity within the pre-existing Christian apparatus.
So the first step is to simply open your thought up to the possibility of the infinite and commit to an idea, reversing the psychological effects of covering over the event.
Because there is simply no such thing as a conservative truth.
To recap the entire deep dive, Badiou forces us to move beyond seeing Christian origins as merely a dialectical synthesis or a random power play driven by historical accident. He forces us to recognize the profound possibility of genuine, revolutionary novelty introduced by the event, a true cut in the finite order.
And that profound possibility requires more than belief. It requires militant action. It requires fidelity.
Trying to understand the emergence of Christianity or any great revolutionary movement using standard historical tools, enumerating all the social factors, the governance, the philosophies, it's like trying to understand the iPhone by analyzing the social formations of copper miners and glassblowers in 2005.
Right. You can list all the components, the situation, Judaism, Rome, philosophy, but without recognizing the singular event, the death resurrection, and the subsequent fidelity of the developers and consumers, the intervention, you miss the moment of true non-derivative novelty that launched a new world.
And that leaves us with the final provocative thought.
If a truth requires constant, militant fidelity to maintain its radical nature, then ask yourself, what am I doing today to betray the event that founded the world I believe in?
Once a truth is conservative, it is no longer a truth.
Now go forth and find your event.
We'll see you next time on Doctrines of the Absurd.